Welcome to the Mongabay Newscast. It's October 28th, 2020, and I'm your host, Mike Gurecki, bringing you the news and inspiration from nature's front line. Today we're shining a spotlight once again on women who are leading Amazon conservation. This is essentially part 2 of a series we started back on September 2nd, when we featured the Women Warriors of the Forest, an all-female indigenous group protecting the forest they call home in Brazil, and spoke with Dr. Deluz Armenteros, a pioneer in the use of remote sensing to monitor forests and biodiversity and a leading forest fire expert in Colombia. On this episode, we're looking at the work of more women who are leading the charge to protect the Amazon rainforest, the largest tropical forest in the world. We speak with Osprey Oriole Lake, founder and executive director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, or WECAN International, through which Lake works with women leaders on the front lines of environmental protection around the world. She joins us today to tell us about some of the most inspiring women she's worked with who are fighting to protect their communities and their forests in the Amazon, and to discuss a groundbreaking new treaty signed by 24 Latin American countries, known as the Escazu Agreement, which would help protect environmental land defenders across Latin America. We also speak with Nicolas Bustamente Hernandez, a contributor to Mongabay who recently profiled an ornithologist and activist in Colombia named Yehimi Fajardo. Bustamente Hernandez tells us how, via the Alas Association she helped establish, Fajardo's work has led hundreds of indigenous children in Colombia's Putumayo department to become avid birders, able to recognize the songs of birds in the region and to more fully appreciate the important role birds play in the local ecosystem.
I think it is very important for us, for journalists, to keep track of those low-profile leaders because they are doing a very important job to protect what we don't see, but what we need. Colombia has around 2,000 species of birds, and most of those are in the Amazon. So we need more and more people like Jamie to protect not only the birds, but all the biodiversity. They are doing this job, and they don't expect nothing in exchange for it. They just want to help their communities.
The Escazu Agreement hasn't received a lot of press here in the United States, but it is an unprecedented international accord designed to improve public access to information and citizen participation around environmental issues, as well as to protect land defenders and environmental activists. The agreement was approved by 24 Latin American countries last March and must now be ratified by 11 of those countries to enter into force. It can't come soon enough either, as violence against environmental defenders in Latin America continues unabated. According to the NGO Global Witness, 212 land and environmental defenders were killed around the world in 2019, an average of more than 4 people a week. More than 2/3 of those killings occurred in Latin America, which Global Witness says has consistently been the worst affected region since the group began tracking data on killings of environmental activists in 2012. Osprey Oriole Lake tells us more about what the Escazu Agreement aims to achieve and the latest on how many countries have ratified the treaty so far.
In 2018, countries of Latin America and the Caribbean heeded the calls of civil society and adopted what's called, and it's a very long name here, the Regional Agreement for Access to Information, to Public Participation, and Access to Justice on Environmental Issues in Latin America and the Caribbean region, or LAC region. And this is also known as the Escazu Agreement. And it gets its name from the fact that this was generated in the city of Escazu in Costa Rica. And basically, it's a really unique agreement and precedent-setting multilateral accord guaranteeing access rights on environmental matters and the explicit protection of human rights and environmental defenders. So I think it's really important to point out that this accord is very special because there's been largely a lack of political will at the national and international levels to implement policies and frameworks that actually ensure the rights and protection of environmental defenders, including their access to decision-making, public information, and justice mechanisms. And although the Escazu Agreement really hasn't received that much international attention, I think it could provide a very promising path forward to protect and defend both nature and frontline land defenders who face many threats for the work that they do. And then just to say where we're at right now with the agreement itself, for the Escazu Agreement to enter into full force for the entire Latin American Caribbean region, or LAC region, 11 countries need to ratify the agreement. And that's a legal process that differs from the first step, which is adoption. Many of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have adopted it, but they haven't actually ratified it. So we were really excited that just at the end of September of this year, Argentina became the 10th country to ratify. So now we only have one more country to ratify before the agreement can go into full effect.
Is an 11th country expected to ratify the treaty soon?
There's a lot of countries in process, so I don't really want to venture to say because I don't know, but there's a lot of advocacy going on in the LAC region for that 11th country.
The Escazu Agreement will be legally binding once it enters into force. What would it legally bind countries to do?
Well, I think it's important to realize, as many people might know, that Latin America is one of the deadliest regions for environmental land defenders. In 2019, of those officially recorded, 212 land defenders were killed, according to Global Witness, with over 2/3 of those murders taking place in Latin America. Combined with entrenched colonial and patriarchal policies, individuals threatened are often indigenous peoples and women environmental and human rights defenders fighting for the protection of their communities and territories. So the Escazu Agreement could have a really powerful impact when it's ratified. As you said, it is a legally binding document that does not allow for any changes by countries in the LAC region and takes into account vulnerable populations and environmental defenders as a central focus. And several studies have shown that the most effective ways to protect biodiverse regions, like the Amazon rainforest that spans 9 Latin American countries, is to protect the rights and sovereignties of indigenous peoples who are most often the leaders of land defense. So by protecting the rights of indigenous land defenders, the Escazu Agreement is really helping to protect the earth from further climate collapse and ecological degradation. The Escazu Agreement requires states to guarantee that environmental activism can be carried out in a safe way. And we should have a way to guarantee safe and suitable space and also prevent the criminalization of land defenders who right now are under constant attack in some regions, such as indigenous leaders defending their territories in Brazil and Ecuador. So it's quite powerful what would happen in terms of its actual implementation on the ground.
In many instances, women are leaders in the fight to conserve the Amazon. Can you tell us a bit about the leadership roles women are playing?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important to point out that indigenous women frequently are the backbone of their communities. They're the knowledge keepers of biodiversity in forests, leaders in resistance efforts to defend their lands. And unfortunately, the threats experienced by them are not isolated events. Across Latin America, women land defenders each carry their own stories of persecution and violence. And women are even more vulnerable as land defenders due to sexual threats and violations when they speak out. So, I just always like to remember just how powerful these women are and the courage that they have as leaders in their communities. And due to unequal gender norms, women are the most adversely impacted by the climate crisis and environmental degradation in the Amazon. But, this is true around the world. Yet, I think one of the most untold stories is that women are indispensable actors and leaders of just and effective solutions. And when we look at root causes, it's clear that women experience, climate change with disproportionate severity because their basic rights continue to be denied in varying forms and intensities across the world. We see enforced gender inequality reduces women's physical and economic mobility, their voice, their opportunity in many places. And so I think that we need to see when there's environmental stresses, women are impacted first and worst. And I think we can't really look at these gendered impacts without also including racial impacts. As we're talking about with indigenous women, also Black and brown women bear an even heavier burden from the impacts of climate change and extractive industries because of the historic and continuing impacts of colonialism, racism, and inequality, and how those different issues are very intersectional. But at the same time, we need to really understand that women are vital to solutions. And as my colleagues and I have witnessed consistently, when women are given space to grow their power and agency, they are really very critical to a lot of solutions and inspiring their communities, leading their communities at a systems level, everything from the expansion of sustainable economies to thriving local ecosystems. And so I think that there's a lot to be said about ensuring that we really stand with these women land defenders and understand how important they are to their communities, and to change these deeper social constructs of patriarchy, white supremacy, colonization, and capitalism, and see how women are understanding these connections and are willing and able to unite across borders and different issues to challenge these systems of oppression and to really build a healthy and just future. And I think that Indigenous women have so much to offer with their traditional ecological knowledge and their ability to organize their communities. So we see this across, Latin America and the Caribbean, and certainly in the Amazon.
You and We Can International work closely with a lot of inspirational women leaders in Latin America. I was hoping you could share some of their stories with us. For instance, would you tell us about the work of Patricia Gualinga in Ecuador?
We are very, very honored to be, longtime friends and colleagues and collaborators with Patricia Gualinga. And as you said, she's a Quechua leader from Seriaco in Ecuador, and she's a spokesperson for an organization called the Amazonian Women Defenders of the Jungle, which is a collective of women land defenders protecting their territories in the Amazon rainforest of Ecuador from extractive industries. And I just deeply love and admire her. She's just a phenomenal leader in every aspect. And she often talks about how the fight of Indigenous peoples to have a healthy environment is something that needs to be visibilized globally, and that the violence and criminalization of their struggles really needs to come to an end. They have been persecuted. She has been personally threatened. And of course, land defenders we know are also murdered. And she's calling for the world to listen because, as she says, their fight to protect the Amazon rainforest is not an isolated fight of the environmental defenders of Indigenous peoples around the world. And it's a fight that allows really the entire world to survive, because we all depend on the Amazon ecosystem globally. And so I think this is something that she's also really highlighting whenever we speak with her, is that, we need to stand with women land defenders because they're protecting water, forests, the global climate for all of us as they put their bodies on the line and stand with amazing courage and take great risks. It's something that I think about every day and concerns me every day and makes me question, how much more we all need to be risking, knowing that our sisters are on the front line like that. Patricia Gualinga was also one of the key leaders in the historic ruling of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. In 2012, the court found that the Ecuadorian government violated the rights of the Sariaco people in allowing an oil company into their territory without consultation or consent. And this ruling has been an important victory for the community, but one that requires, of course, tireless vigilance to continue to uphold. And again, with Patricia's leadership and others, at this point, Seriaco's powerful efforts against oil extraction over the years has already kept an estimated 100 million barrels of oil in the ground and protected primary rainforest in their territories. So I think that, her work has been phenomenal. And again, something like the Escazu Agreement would be something that would help her and many of the other women leaders to have a lot more say in environmental laws, as well as protection to do their work in land defense.
Who are some other women leaders we should be talking about?
There's two women that I really wanted to highlight. One is Sonia Guajajara from the Brazilian Amazon. She is the executive coordinator for the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil. And, she's just been incredibly courageous also. I know there have been a lot of killings of land defenders in her family. And I know she's experienced a lot of threats as well for her leadership. And she's also been a powerful Indigenous woman leader for other women leaders, helping organize marches and big events in Brazil to protect the Amazon and also to speak up for Indigenous peoples in Brazil. Under the Bolsonaro government, there's just been ongoing assaults and attacks directly against Indigenous peoples and destruction of their territories through agribusiness And it's just been a very, very difficult time there because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also actual purposeful burnings of the Amazon rainforest to make room for agrobusiness and other industries. So it's been really heartbreaking because there's already been natural fires because of the climate crisis, but now there's also fires being done by industry and the Bolsonaro regime just allowing this to continue. So she's fighting very, very hard for attacks against indigenous peoples by the government as well as their territories. And we were really honored to be with her in Madrid during the last COP in 2019.
That's the Conference of the Parties to the UN's Framework Convention on Climate Change, the climate negotiations that resulted in the Paris Agreement.
And to ensure that her voice was heard there. And she's constantly being, doing interviews, being out in the public. She also actually ran for vice president, I believe, in 2018 of Brazil. So she's been quite a key figure and, I think one of the truly outstanding women of this time in terms of Indigenous women's leadership.
And who's the second woman you wanted to tell us about?
Let me tell you about Namante Nin Cuimo. She is an Indigenous Wairani woman, and she's incredibly committed to defending her ancestral territory, also from Ecuador. She has been raised in the traditional community in the Pastaza region of the Ecuadorian Amazon. And Namante co-founded the Indigenous-led organization called Cibo Alliance in 2015 to protect Indigenous lands and livelihoods from resource extraction. And in 2018, she was elected as the first female president of the Wairani organization of the Pastaza province. So that's pretty exciting. And she also led her people in a historic legal victory against the Ecuadorian government, which protected 500,000 acres of primary rainforest in the Amazon and set a precedent for Indigenous rights across the region. And now, Namante is continuing these fights to protect her area, but also doing a lot of work to bring protective equipment and all kinds of things for the COVID-19 crisis as well.
And of course, women aren't just leading conservation in the Amazon. I just saw a weekend press release about Indigenous women leaders in Canada who posted an open letter warning global financial companies to stop supporting tar sands oil.
Absolutely. I think that Indigenous women leaders are critical. I think as we face, multiple crises from the climate crisis to COVID-19 to, gender inequality to racial disparities, that the knowledge that Indigenous women have of caring for the land directly over millennium and their knowledge of their territories, their knowledge of how to live in harmony with nature is essential. And that, at this time, we really need a different paradigm, a different worldview. And I think they're offering both very practical solutions about protecting forests, water, biodiversity, the climate, as well as offering ideas about alternative economics. There are concepts coming out of the global south of buen vivir, living well, living in harmony with nature, understanding that, we need to have completely different views about our economic structures and our laws concerning nature are coming from Indigenous peoples and many Indigenous women leaders really speaking about how we need to practice buen vivir, or another concept coming from the global south, sumak kausai, basically living well. And how do we live well in community, and not just in the community of people, but of our non-human relatives and the ecosystem entirely. So I think that their courage, their frameworks, their worldview, as well as their activism is something that we all need to really adhere to at this critical time.
Do you think the Escazu Agreement could provide a template for protecting environmental defenders around the world?
I certainly hope so. I think that it would be something incredibly valuable in pretty much every region of the world, because we're seeing, as we are facing these crises and we are seeing the rise of right-wing governments all over the world, that at this critical time, the need for land defenders to, one, have, access to information, a seat at the table, and protection to do their work is going to become more and more vital as the years unfold.
A lot of great work to protect the Amazon and its biodiversity of life is being done at the local level. So that's what we wanted to focus on in the second part of today's episode, looking at women leading Amazon conservation. Yehimi Fajardo is an ornithologist and conservationist in the Putumayo department of Colombia, whose work was recently profiled on Mongabay by Nicolas Bustamente Hernandez, a science reporter based in Bogota who is a staff writer for El Tiempo, the largest newspaper in Colombia, in addition to a Mongabay contributor. Yehimi Fajardo does not speak English, so we asked Bustamente Hernandez to tell us what he learned about her and her work in the course of his reporting.
I got to know Jamie thanks to the Amazon Conservation Team, the ACT, which is also a nonprofit that works in various Amazon departments in Colombia. So when I was told about this project, about writing about women who are doing an exceptional work in the Amazon, I contacted them, and they were telling me that there are a lot of women working in the Amazon doing great jobs, but most of the coverage from the media have been focused on the same women. So I say it would be nice to have like the opportunity to speak with women like who have like a low profile, these women who are working extremely hard for the conservation of the environment in the Amazon, but who are not very well known. They are very well known inside their communities, but not very well known outside them. So it was one of the main goals of this reporting, trying to portray the roles as outstanding leaders who are not very well known. So it was one of the main goals. So I contacted the ACT, the Amazon Conservation Team, and they told me about Jamie, who has an association. It's like also a non-profit who is trying to protect the birds in the Amazon. So that's kind of the way I got to meet her.
Yehimi Fajardo lives in Putumayo. Can you tell us about the forests and biodiversity of Putumayo and their conservation status?
Well, Putumayo is South Colombia, southeast of Colombia. It is in a very particular location because this is the Amazon, but this is also the Amazon foothills where the Amazon jungle meets with the Andean mountain range. So they have these particular ecosystems where they have the mountains very near, but they also have the characteristic biodiversity of the Amazon. So yeah, this is a place where you have many different kinds of vegetation, for example. So you can have the high mountain vegetation very near, just a range of a few kilometers. But then you have the impressive jungle and this thick and wet jungle, So this is the location of the Putumayo department. And in the Putumayo department, we have many indigenous communities. So I might say this particular department has had the privilege of having a good preservation and a good conservation program from the government, because most of these indigenous communities live in reservations which are not intended for exploitation. However, in Colombia we have, as many people might know, we have had narco traffic. So we have illegal groups who are trying to clean the forest to plant coca plants. And this is one of the major threats for the Amazon right now in Colombia, the deforestation for illegal planting of these cultures, if I might say. And we have also illegal mining in the Amazon jungle in Colombia. We have also deforestation and loss of forests because illegal groups are cleaning the forest to open space for roads. So these are kind of the major threats for the biodiversity of the Amazon in Colombia, primarily, just to mention a few aspects.
And so Yehimi Fajardo helped establish the Alas Association in 2015 to conserve nature in Putumayo and its bird species in particular.
Jamie Fajardo, she's from Mocoa. Mocoa is the capital city of Putumayo department. And even though this department is inhabited by mostly by indigenous people, she's not from any indigenous community. So she's what the indigenous people might call a colono, like a person who is not part of their community, but she's very integrated into the Putumayo community. So she went to university. She studied environmental engineering, and she came to Bogota, to the capital of the country. She specialized in conservation, and then she went back to Putumayo. So she established this association with the goal of protecting birds of the Amazon foothills. I think people might find interesting that knowing that Colombia is the country with the most registered species of birds in the world. We have around 2,000 species of birds in Colombia. So and most of those species are in the Amazon. So Jamie wanted to protect those species, and the way to protect those species was to get the community involved with the birds, because most of them just lived in the jungle, in the Amazon jungle, but they don't. What she says is that they don't pay too much attention, for example, to birds. They don't. They get used to their singings, and they don't pay that much attention. So she wanted to show people inside her community the birds and their singings, and she wanted that even little children know that they live in this very privileged environment where they have almost, I don't know, I think it's maybe 1,000 species of birds. So the first step to protect those animals was to get to know the birds. So she established the ALA Association, which in English translates like the Wings Association, and she started working on that. And she's been working with the communities, with the indigenous communities as well, just so they can know the species of birds they have and their singings, the ways to identify different birds, and using binoculars and using all the tools that bird watchers usually need to do their job. So this is basically her job. The AL Association has benefited nearly 500 people, most of them children and young people from the indigenous communities of the Amazon foothills. So that's basically, in just a few words, her work.
Her work in the communities, what's that actually look like? I know it includes workshops to teach kids to recognize bird calls and to log birds in eBird or other digital citizen science platforms, right?
Yeah, for example, they have performed censuses of the birds, so they keep looking for new species. So one of the tasks she asked to her students is to go out and track new birds and keep identifying new species of birds. They have workshops. They also, well, besides those censuses, they have workshops. They also elaborate these field guides. So they need to know where the birds are. So they need to know what kind of clothes, for example, they need to have, and they need to know what kind of tools they need to spot the birds, for example, binoculars. And they also impart speeches about birds, like just a regular class inside a classroom. Also excursions to the countryside. Well, this is basically what they do. They need to register more and more species. So, for example, you mentioned eBird. eBird is a very very nice platform, online platform, where bird watchers keep registering the new species that they found. So, for example, they have registered some species on eBird, and they keep expanding the number of bird species in Colombia. I like people that are listening to this podcast that this is just a particular department in Colombia, which is even though it's a big department, they are just working inside Putumayo. They are trying to spot new species in Putumayo. So one of the intentions of Yehimi, were one of her goals, is to expand the Alas Association work to the other Amazon departments in Colombia, such as Amazon, such as Guainía, and have new like bird watching stations where they can have like this network where they can integrate all the work from the Amazon, because this is just as like a particular spot of the Amazon. So she wants to expand that to the whole Colombian Amazon jungle.
And you actually spoke with some of the indigenous kids that are students of Yehimi Fajardo's.
So yeah, as I said before, most of the people who are benefited from the Alas Association work are children. So I spoke with Lady Lorena Zapuyes over the phone, and it's very curious because children, I might say, they are very lucky to live in the middle of nature and in the middle of this biodiverse jungle. But they are also used to, they have smartphones, they are very into new technologies. So my impression is that even though they live in this lucky environment, they don't pay that much attention to nature. So for example, this girl just said that she knew that birds are pretty, they are colorful, they sing pretty, but she didn't know the relevance of birds in terms of ecosystems. So all the children that have been attending the Alas Association, they say that they have learned the importance for environment that birds have. So for example, they now know that birds can spread seeds, for example, which is very important for the Amazon. They know that birds eat the fruits. Most of these birds eat fruits, and the seeds, when they fly to other places, they plant these seeds over the ground, and there is a new tree that's coming out of the ground from that seed. They also know that they play an important role in pollination. For example, they know that birds are helping the Amazon to be preserved. So yeah, it's funny because, as we might say, that children who are living in the Amazon and in any forest in the world are very lucky, but these children are getting so involved with their technologies and their cell phones that most of the time they are not paying attention to their environment. And one of the other important things, I think, one project the Alas Association is working now, is they are thinking about houses that are good for birds. I mean, like human houses where birds can go to the trees. So they are planting trees on their backyards, for example, some particular species of trees, which fruits are primarily food for birds. And they are trying to have this so birds can go to their houses, to human houses, and eat the fruits. And this is a way to show how animals, in this case birds, and human can share their environment. So I think this is another project which is very relevant that the Al Association is doing right now.
Yeah, that's the Friendly Houses with Birds program.
Exactly.
I had planned to ask about that because it sounds very cool.
Yeah, I think it is because we don't have that in the cities. I live in an apartment. I have a couple of just small plants, but as you can imagine, these houses in the Amazon foothills, they have these huge backyards where they can plant trees. So what Jamie says is, hey, why don't we plant trees that the birds can feed on, can live in. Sorry. So this is a nice project. I think this is one of the most disruptive projects she has right now, and she's trying to develop it at the moment in the middle of this pandemic, because this world situation is affecting even those communities. But she's very committed to develop this project of the friendly houses.
Why do you think it's important to feature work like that of Yehimi Fajardo's?
I think it is very important for us, for journalists, to keep track of those low profile leaders, because they are doing a very important and a very relevant job to protect what we don't see, but what we need. Probably most people who are listening to this podcast have not been to the Amazon, but they need to know that important forests as the Amazon are being protected for very simple people, such as Yehimi, who are doing an exceptional job. As I said before, Colombia has around 2,000 species of birds, and most of those are in the Amazon. So we need more and more people like Yehimi to protect not only the birds, but all the biodiversity, birds, animals of all kinds, mammals, and also the vegetation and the rivers and the water. So that's what I think is most important. They are doing this job and they don't expect nothing in exchange for it. They just want to help their communities, which is very important, I think.
If you enjoy the Mongabay newscast, we ask that you please help spread the word by telling a friend. That's the best way to help expand our reach and keep the show growing. Another way you can help is by becoming a monthly sponsor via our Patreon page at patreon.com/Mongabay. We are a nonprofit news outlet, so just $1 or more per month would really help us by offsetting production costs and hosting fees. Supporters at the $10 a month level also get access to our members-only insider content. So if you're a fan of our audio reports from Nature's Front Line, please head to patreon.com/Mongabay to learn more and support the Mongabay newscast. That's patreon.com/Mongabay. You and your friend you tell about this podcast can subscribe to the Mongabay newscast on the Google Podcasts app, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Pandora, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Or you can download our new app for Apple and Android devices. Just search either app store for the Mongabay newscast app to gain fingertip access to new shows and all of our previous episodes. And of course, you can read all of Mongabay's news and inspiration from Nature's Front Line at mongabay.com. Or if you prefer to keep up with us on social media, follow us at facebook.com/Mongabay, or on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is @Mongabay on both of those platforms. Thanks as always for listening to the Mongabay newscast. I'm your host, Mike Gurecki, signing off. Talk to you again in 2 weeks.